I spent 10 days in Palestine, in the occupied territories, and in Israel proper. I've had the great luxury over the past 10 years of seeing a few countries. I have not spent more time or seen more of another country or another territory than I did this summer. I think what shocked me the most was in any sort of opinion piece or reported piece or whatever you want to call it that I've read about Israel and about the conflict with the Palestinians, there's a word that comes up all the time, and it is complexity. That and its closely related adjective, complicated. And so while I had my skepticisms and I had my suspicions of the Israeli government, of the occupation, what I expected was that I would find a situation in which it was hard to discern right from wrong. It was hard to understand the morality at play. It was hard to understand the conflict. And perhaps the most shocking thing was I immediately understood what was going on over there. Probably the best example I can think of is the second day when we went to Hebron, and the reality of the occupation became clear. We were driving out of East Jerusalem. I was with the Palestinian, was with PalFest, and we were driving out of East Jerusalem into the West Bank, and you could see the settlements, and they would point out the settlements, and it suddenly dawned on me that I was in a region of the world where some people could vote and some people could not. And that was obviously very, very familiar to me. I got to Hebron and we got out as a group of writers and we were given a tour by a Palestinian guide. And we got to a certain street and he said to us, "I can't walk down this street. If you want to continue, you have to continue without me." And that was shocking to me. And we walked down the street and we came back and there was a market area. Hebron is very, very poor. It wasn't always very poor, but it is very, very poor. Its market area has been shut down. But there are a few vendors there that I wanted to support. And I was walking to try to get to the vendor and I was stopped at a checkpoint. Checkpoints all through the city. Checkpoints obviously all through the West Bank. Your mobility is completely inhibited, and the mobility of the Palestinians is totally inhibited. And I was walking to the checkpoint, and an Israeli guard stepped out, probably about the age of my son. And he said to me, "What's your religion, bro?" And I said, "Well, I don't, I'm not really religious." And he said, "Come on, stop messing around. What is your religion?" I said, I'm not playing. I'm not really religious. And it became clear to me that unless I professed my religion and the right religion, I wasn't going to be allowed to walk forward. So he said, "Well, okay, so what was your parents' religion?" I said, "Well, they weren't that religious either." He says, what were your grandparents' religion?" And I said, "My grandmother was a Christian." And then he allowed me to pass. And it became very, very clear to me what was going on there. And I have to say, it was quite familiar. Again, I was in a territory where your mobility is inhibited, where your voting rights are inhibited, where your right to the water is inhibited, where your right to housing is inhibited, and it's all inhibited based on ethnicity. And that sounded extremely, extremely familiar to me. And so the most shocking thing about my time over there was how uncomplicated it actually is. Now, I'm not saying the details of it are not complicated. History is always complicated. Present events are always complicated. But the way this is reported in the Western media is as though one needs a PhD in Middle Eastern studies to understand the basic morality of holding a people in a situation in which they don't have basic rights, including the right that we treasure most, the franchise, the right to vote. And then declaring that state a democracy is actually not that hard to understand. It's actually quite familiar to those of us with a familiarity to African American history.
Well, Ta-Nehisi Coates, last night you were asked about the significance of Martin Luther King's words on Vietnam. You said it's taken you years to, quote, understand nonviolence as an ethic, and that you understood that ethic in Israel. Could you explain?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the thing to do is just to proceed off of what I said. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to the fight against segregation. Israel's a segregated society. The occupied territories are segregated. The Jews segregated. It's not, hard to understand. There are different signs for where different people can go. There are different license plates forbidding different people from going different places. Now, what the authorities will tell you is that this is a security measure. But if you go back to the history of Jim Crow in this country, they would tell you the exact same thing. People always have good reasons besides, I hate you and I don't like you to justify their right for imposing an oppressive regime on other people. It's never quite that simple. And so that was the first thing. But the second thing I think that you're referring to is, this is like really personal for me, because I came up in a time and in a place where I did not really understand the ethic of nonviolence. And by ethic, I mean the notion that violence itself is corrupting, that it corrupts the soul. And I didn't quite understand that. If I'm truly honest with you, as much as I saw my relationship with the Palestinian people there, and as much as it was clear what the relationship was, it was at the same time clear that there was some sort of relationship with the Israeli people too. And it wasn't one that I particularly enjoyed, because I understood the rage that comes when you have a history of oppression. I understood the anger. I understood the sense of humiliation that comes when people subject you to just manifold oppression, to genocide, and people look away from that. I come from the descendants of 250 years of enslavement. I come from a people who sexual violence and rape is marked in our very bones and in our DNA. And I understand how when you feel that the world has turned its back on you, how you can then turn your back on the ethics of the world. But I also understood how corrupting that can be. I was listening to actually my congressman last night, or I guess it was 2 nights ago, talk on the news, and a journalist asked him, how many children, how many people must be killed to justify this operation? Is there an upper limit for the number of people that could be killed when you would say this is just too much? This just doesn't compute. This does not add up. And I have to tell you, that congressman couldn't give a number. And I thought, that man has been corrupted. That man has lost himself. He's lost himself in humiliation. He's lost himself in vengeance. He has lost himself in violence. I keep hearing this term repeated over and over again. The right to self-defense. What about the right to dignity? What about the right to morality? What about the right to be able to sleep at night? Because what I know is, if I was complicit, and I am complicit, in dropping bombs on children, and dropping bombs on refugee camps, no matter who's there, it would give me trouble sleeping at night. And I worry for the souls of people who can do this and can sleep at night.